Hey, Wiki Deke here, taking a look at the worst NHL coaching jobs at the 50-game mark of the 2020 season. Yes, the ones that make you want to vomit in your mouth. So before we get started, two quick notes. One, there is an Aaron Hernandez documentary on Netflix. I highly recommend you watch it. Very eye-opening. It's 3 episodes. I think it runs about 3 hours, and it will captivate you. Very interesting to see how he was raised, some of the issues going on in his life, how the Patriots dealt with it, and all these different factors. Definitely thumbs up. Kind of a sad story all the way around. His victims, himself. Interesting thing. So if you're looking for something to watch in the cold days of February, definitely recommend it. Number 2, as I was preparing this and going out and getting ready to slander and slash various NHL coaches, it dawned on me that's not really fair. Because if you look at the teams that really seem to be having problems, it's not really the coach's fault. We don't really have any Willie Desjardins in the league at this moment. But we seem to have a lot of Peter Chiarelli types because most of these problems are roster problems. They're not actual strategy or what have you. Issues with the coaching. So instead of looking at the 5 worst NHL coaching jobs at the 50-game mark of the 2020 season, we're going to focus on the GMs. And we have to start with a pretty obvious one. Yep. The debris floating upside down, the organic waste that is the San Jose Sharks. Prior to the season, I think most of us thought the Sharks would be one of the top 3 teams in the Pacific, qualify for the playoffs, and have a decent run at trying to get out of the West into the Cup Finals. And that hasn't exactly worked out. And if you look at the roster, you get kind of a feeling why. Now, of course, they fired Peter DeBoer, Mr. Boring, earlier on the season. It hasn't really made much of a difference. And the reason for that is I'm not sure whether they're going to find a coach that can fix the defense on this team. Obviously, we start in goal, Martin Jones and Aaron Dell. Now with Martin Jones, but 3-4 seasons ago, he dragged them to the Cup Finals. He was excellent. And if you were honest, even if you're a Sharks fan, he was the reason that they went. He dragged them through the Western Conference Finals and into the Stanley Cup Finals and made it competitive. Without him, they would have gotten just annihilated. The Sharks had a history of their big players disappearing in those games, and that happened. The difference this time was they didn't have Nabokov or somebody in goal who was flailing around. Jones was tremendous. Since then, however, not sure what happened, but he has fallen apart. Lost his game completely. You have to imagine his confidence is measured in millimeters, and it's a mess, and it's sad. Seems like a good guy. And then they also have Aaron Dell, who, really? Is it anything other than when you think of Aaron Dell? So how could Wilson go into another season with that combo? And yes, I realize Martin Jones' contract is a bit of a nightmare, but surely you could have brought somebody else in who would have been certainly, maybe splitting starts with him or something of that sort. Create an environment where all the pressure wasn't on Jones and you had somebody who could be competent. Wilson did not do that. And then we move out to the defense. And this will be the controversial part of the decision. Wilson went all in on Captain Morgan. And it's easy to complain about it now, but 5 years ago, was Carlson one of the better defenders in the NHL? Certainly. He was certainly the best offensive defenseman. But he was playing average defense. And, as long as he played average defense and continued to produce defensively or offensively, then, yeah, he was a force. But that was a long time ago. The last 2 or 3 seasons, of course, injuries. And does anybody think he's going to make it to the end of this 8-year contract as a dynamic player? Does anybody really think he's a dynamic player now? Because his defense is poor, and he's got 5 goals or something, but to his credit, like 36 or 37 assists. So he's not like his offensive game has just died, but he's not what he was. And you gave this guy an 8-year contract at $11 million, which pretty much just sauteed your salary cap. That seems like a bad decision. But that's the one that Wilson went with. I think it's even more problematic when you think about the fact that Brent Burns ain't a young chicken. You may want to go check cap friendly or something, but I think he's 35 this year, certainly 34 at least. And so he's on the downside of his career. And then you have Vlasic, who's a very good stay-at-home defender, but he's getting up there in age. And last year he had a poor season, and this year he's not been great either. And I don't know how old he is, but he just had his 1,000th game ceremony. So he's got to be 34, 35, 36, somewhere in there. So he's not exactly a young buck anymore. So when your goaltending is not good and your defense has a lot of questions, GM needs to address that. And he didn't. And they are suffering for it now. Now, before they had enough offense that they could, often offset their defensive shortcomings. And this year they haven't. Now, some of that's bad luck. He just had bad luck. Couture getting his, face mashed in. That's bad luck. Losing Pavelski, can you blame him for that? At some point, they were going to lose Pavelski. And Pavelski hasn't exactly been setting the world on fire. In Dallas, he looks like one of those players that really should have stayed in San Jose, and both the team and he would have benefited from that, but it didn't work out. But, they brought in Patrick Marleau, and they still have, Big Joe putting around on the ice. And, at some point, having an 80-year-old playing center on your team, even if he's on the third or fourth line, it probably says you need to look at your offensive talent. And now they're totally screwed with Hurdle out with an ACL and an MCL and I don't know, amputee at this point. So it's a lost season for San Jose. But, if Doug Wilson didn't have, this just incredible relationship with the owner, you'd probably have to think his job would be on the line. And going ahead and firing Peter DeBoer, I don't see how that solves anything. And it hasn't. And I'm not a Peter DeBoer fan. It's just really, you've created this roster that's a mess, and now you wonder why it's not performing. Blame the coach. Number 2, Ray Shero. Yes, the Devils, former GM. I don't get the Ray Shero love. I really don't. Yeah, I know they won cups in Pittsburgh. Do you really think they won cups in Pittsburgh because of Ray Shero? Or do you think they won cups in Pittsburgh because of some guy named Crosby and another one named Malkin? And people will say, well, he drafted some of these players in Pittsburgh. Yeah, really. I'm not a professional NHL GM, but if somebody told me you have the number 1 overall pick, and it's going to be Crosby or any of these guys, who are you going to take? I don't get it. And I thought his moves this year just reeked of panic. Bringing in Wayne Simmons. I love Wayne Simmons. I liked him when he was a King. I liked him when he was a Flyer. But Wayne Simmons is done as a NHL force. Not because he's not a good guy, not because he's not trying hard, not because he doesn't have the same skills. He is just beat to hell. This guy has taken a beating. And we're not talking like hamstring pulls. We're talking he had a broken pelvis. Do you know when you get broken pelvises? When you get hit by a car. And I know people that have broken pelvises because I used to work somewhere in that field. And when you have a broken pelvis, you don't recover and be like, yoga. You're limited. There's pain, ongoing pain often. It's not, this is like major injuries. And I know they only signed Simmons to a 1-year, $5 million contract, but that sounds like more signing a name than somebody who's going to produce. And sure enough, Simmons hasn't really produced. Now, again, I like Wayne Simmons. It's just at this point in his career, it's not really going to add much. The PK Subban trade, has it been worse than most people thought? Yeah, but that was pretty well thought that his career was now sort of, had plateaued and was on the downslide. So can you really be surprised it hasn't gone that great? Jack Hughes, already starting to hear it. He's a bust. He's not a bust. If you watch the Devils play, Jack Hughes is a dynamic player, and he's going to be great in a couple years. He needs to be in the minors. He needs to be out of the spotlight, and he needs to be in the minors, and they need to lock him in the weight room. He is just not physical enough to play at the NHL level. You can see what other teams do. They go after him physically, and it was kind of the thing a lot of people talked about when they were looking at the draft, that Kakko was probably the more ready player because physically he was more ready. Those plays that Hughes did last year on the U.S. team and what have you, where he would, go deking through the center zone. Well, that's great when you're playing Swaziland. But when you're playing against, a team with real NHL defenders and you start trying to do that, what are they going to do? They're going to ignore the puck. They're going to launch you onto your ass. I watched the Flyers game against the Devils. Every time he got the puck, nobody was looking at the puck. They were just bashing him into the boards and everything else. And, he's going to have to deal with that. But the kid needs to get bigger. I mean, he just does. He needs to get stronger if he's going to play center in the NHL. Is he a bust? No. Was he the obvious first-round pick? Pick between Kakko and him, whatever you prefer. I don't knock Shero for that. But, for the long-term health of the club, this kid shouldn't be playing at the NHL level. I think he's got strong enough confidence that he'll be fine. But all this just reeks of panic. And panic, of course, to keep Hall on the team. And it should probably tell you something that when Hall looked at the future of the Devils, he wanted out. And not even waiting to the tread line kind of wanted out. He was trying to be polite about it, not get people angry at him. But it became pretty apparent, pretty clear in the season that, I'm not resigning here. And that is an indictment of the GM. So Ray Shero getting fired. I know a lot of people were stunned. I'm not. Look at the Devils. They're awful. Yeah, they have a couple good players, and he's brought in a couple of good players, but the Devils are going to be awful next year too. And he's been there, 4 or 5 years? So, number 3, so hungry. With apologies to Homer J. Simpson and the baseball starvation episode. David Poile, I always pronounce his last name wrong, so I will own that. Nashville. The Predators. They look like they've been on a vegan diet. They're getting mighty thin. Don't you get the feeling like the Predators' window is closed? And I put that on the GM. Now, I didn't like the coach, Laviolette. I hated him when he was with the Flyers. I didn't like him with the Predators. But is it really his fault that, Poli can't find a competent center? I mean, Seth Jones for Ryan Johansson. If I just said to you in a complete vacuum, which player would you take? Wouldn't you take Seth Jones 100 times out of 100? Anybody think Ryan Johansson's really a number one center in the NHL? If I asked you to name the top 15 number one centers, would he be included? Don't think so. And then you have the Kyle Turris debacle. And then you have, I just forgot his name, the kid they brought in who was on Colorado and was thought to be a cancer and was traded to Ottawa. And then to Columbus. Well, we'll just have to skip that. But, they're just poor down the center position. And they have problems producing offense. And now Pekka Rinne is starting to show his age, and their defense isn't as strong as it was. And they just look like a team that, man, that window has closed. Now, I will say, if you ever get a chance to see a Predators game, you should watch it, because Roman Josi is just a treat to watch. That guy is a complete defenseman, absolutely amazing. And if they make the playoffs, it's pretty much going to be down to him single-handedly dragging them there. He is absolutely excellent player. Really, really good. Think of like Doughty in his prime. Doughty when he was 23 or 24, and he would, dominate defense and crush it, going up the offensive side of the ice as well. Josi is just tremendous. To me, the best defensive player in the league, to be honest. Absolutely amazing. But not sure firing the coach with the Preds was really going to make much of a difference, and it hasn't. Number 4, Crazy Town. Yes, play the Aussie song in your mind. Now, this is an absentee vote. It is for Paul Fenton, the GM of the Wild. If you have The Athletic, go do a search for him on their site. There's an article about him. He was apparently one of the more unique GMs in the league in his short reign, where he managed to piss off everybody in the office. And let's just think his out of the box, let's just say his out of the box thinking wasn't out of the box. It was out of the universe. If you've ever read or watched the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it sounds like this is the GM version of it. I'm not suggesting he was taking drugs or anything of that sort, but there's some wild stories, and really makes you wonder what he was doing. So since this team this year is suffering because of his inability to put together the roster, I'm still including him on the list. And then number 5, the Whale. This, of course, refers to the wealthy people who come into Vegas and they bet everything, and they either walk away with a big winning or they lose their ass. But they get comped and everything, and that would be Kelly McCrimmon in this case, the nice GM. They do not understand the Gallant firing. I just don't. If you look at the Las Vegas Knights, you know what the problem is. That defensive roster is weak, weak, weak. And that is on the GM. That is not on the coach. I don't know how Gallant was supposed to make those defensive players better. They're just soft and weak. And then the irony of it is when they fired him, they brought him in with Peter DeBoer, who just got done convincing everybody in San Jose that he couldn't fix a bad defense. So if he couldn't fix it in San Jose, how's he going to fix it in Vegas? It's a GM problem. It's a roster problem. And so we look at the Knights, and had they got that new smell, new coach smell bump in the standings? Have they gone on a big streak? No. They're doing pretty much exactly what they were doing with Gallant, because the crappy defenders haven't suddenly become good defenders or even competent defenders. So in Vegas, it's pretty much going to be, hope Fleury goes insanely productive with his game and gets them into the playoffs and carries them, while the offense outscores the defense. Because, man, that's not an impressive defensive core at all. And the guys that you usually kind of count on in the defensive core to be, competent aren't having the greatest seasons either. And, of course, that's all Gallant's fault. So be interesting to see. So what about some of the other teams that might crop up that you would think of? If you watch my videos, I'm not a big Rob Blake fan with the Kings. But, he hasn't really had anything to do this year. The Kings were going to lose. They're going to rebuild, and they're pretty much doing that. Tom McClellan hire certainly looks like a good one. So nothing on him. Detroit, is Yzerman's halo being dimmed at all by what's happening in Detroit? No, not really. That's a team. You look at their roster and you look at the prospects. Again, they're rebuilding. They need to tank this year. Now, mind you, they're tanking better than most people have ever tanked. But a tank is a tank, and it's just part of the process. And they're going to probably do it again next year. Because again, you want to accumulate all those prospects so you can bring them up around the same time and hopefully do some damage in the playoffs and moving forward. So none of those teams really come to mind. And you look at most of the other teams. We can always mention Toronto just because they're usually in one form or another of chaos. Who knows what's going to happen with Toronto? Maybe they get in and they start winning. I think Dubas is a raging idiot for giving half of his salary cap space to 4 players. But you never know. Maybe they get in and their defensive core can hold it together long enough that the offense can outscore their defensive shortcomings. We'll have to see. My personal favorite would be for Toronto to actually miss the playoffs, just because I'd want to see the large mushroom cloud that appeared above Toronto as the Toronto media combusted in one giant flaming blast. Must suck to be a player in Toronto. Everything you do is criticized. So anyways, that's it. Let me know your thoughts below. Tell me how wrong I am. Why Doug Wilson is a god. Why Ray Shero should have not only not been fired, but they should have made a statue for him. So thanks for watching. Deke out.